Welcome to Crunch Math. Today we're going to be going over part 2 of our multi-part series, the keys to getting an 800 on the SAT Math. We're going to be going over linear functions. So let's get into what this means. The first part is our linear equations. These are straight lines that follow the equation y equals mx plus b. Now we move into the second portion. These are our functions, usually shown as things like f of x, g of x, and h of x. And these have an output, a rule, and an input. And what we're going to see is that these functions are going to specify different equations that are going to correspond to graphs. In this case, they're going to correspond to linear equations. So let's move on to the questions you're now going to see. First, you're going to see word problems involving relations, setting up an equation, or getting an answer. The other kinds you're going to see are our short questions. These are going to involve things like tables, where you're going to have to determine things like slope, and then it's also going to involve things known as a k constant, usually k. So now let's move into the problems. All right, so our first problem is here. This is going to be one of the more short answer problems involving a table. So pause to read it. All right, so once you pause, let's get into this. So some values of the linear function shown on the table, we're looking for f of 3. So what we're going to do here is we need to determine an equation from this, and we can figure out slope. So we're going to take 2 points. We're going to take 0 and 2, and we're going to do the slope equation, which is going to be our change in y over our change in x. So the change in x is going to be from 0 to 2, so that change is going to be 2. And then the change in f of x, it goes from -2 to 4, but it's because it's final minus initial, the -2 becomes positive, and it's just going to be 6. So from this, we get our slope as 3. And this is one of the values we need. So now let's go back to what a linear equation is. So we got y equals mx plus b. Our m is going to be this 3. Then you got our x, but we don't know our y-intercept. So what we're going to do here is we're going to plug in a value from this table. Let's plug in 0, -2. When we plug in 0, this 3x becomes 0. And then the y is going to become -2. And what this tells us is that b is then going to equal -2. So now we've got a whole new equation where what we're going to do now, this y is the same equal to f of x. And which now we're going to plug in the x value, the input of 3 into this x value right here. When you do that, you get y equals 9 minus 2. And from there, you're going to get y equals 7. And this is going to be our answer for this problem. Meaning B is the correct answer. Now here is our next problem. This is a word problem involving setting up an equation. So let's get into it. Pause to read this question. All right, so now that you pause, let's look at this. A museum charges $21 per person for the first 25 people, and 14 for each additional person after that. So, and for groups of 25 people or more. So which function f gives the total charge in dollars for a tour group with n people, where n is greater than 25? So this is now playing all these things. If we're charging 21 per person for the first 25, that means this is going to be our initial amount before n equals 25. So we can set this up. This is before this. And this is going to give us what we know as our y-intercept. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply 21 times, or this should be more n, but it's 25 times 21. So let's do that. And you're going to get our initial amount as 525. This is before n is greater than 25. So now that we've got this established, after 25 people, over that, we're charging 14 per person, and people are going to be specified as n. So now we can make an equation. So when n is greater than 25, f of n is going to have a change in $14 per person, so we can say our slope is 14n. And then our initial amount is going to be 525. And this is how we're going to set up our equation. And now we just have to see which one corresponds to this, and that's going to be answer choice B. Now let's move on to our next problem. Alright, so here's our next problem. This is a word problem involving finding an answer. Pause to read this question. Alright, now that you've paused, let's look into this. There's 20,000 units as our Y initial and then 15,000 as our Y final. Our X initial is going to be $40 per unit and our Y initial is going to be 60. Now, where do we go with this? We're going to do our change in Y over change in X. It's going from Y final minus Y initial for the change in Y. So it's going to be 15,000 minus 20,000, which is going to be negative 5,000. Then our change in X, it goes from 40 to 60, which is 20. You don't really need a calculator for this as the zeros cancel out, and it's 500 divided by 2, or negative 500, which you're going to get negative 250. So now we've gotten our slope, but that's not all there is to an equation. We obviously know that there needs to be a y-intercept. So we're going to plug in some values. We're going to plug in the 15,000 units and the $60 per unit. So it's going to be y equals negative 250 times 60. So we're going to add our 60 in here. Plus b. And then we're just going to say that this y is going to correspond to this 15,000. And now you can use your calculator, particularly Desmos, and you're going to get 30,000. And we're going to say 30K, just to make it easier, is going to be our b. Now we have our whole equation. We have y. Now we aren't looking for an equation here. We need to figure out a specific value at a certain x value. And that x value is going to be this $55 per unit. So we're going to plug that here into x. And then just Desmos again. So it's just, what you're going to get is a. For this last problem, this is involving tables with constants. So pause to read it. Okay, once you paused it and maybe solved it, let's look into this. We have some constants, we have a and b, and they're specifying a linear equation, ax plus b. That's going to correspond to this chart. So we're going to approach it just like we did the other chart. We're first going to set up, finding the slope. The change is change in y, we're changing x. The change is the x, let's take it from 1 to 2. So our change in x is just 1. And then our change in y is final minus initial, so 0 minus negative 64. From this, we get a slope of 64. And now let's write our equation. So now that we've gotten our equation, we don't know what the y-intercept is. So we're gonna take some specific points. Let's use 2, 0. So our y is gonna be 0, and our x we're gonna plug in as 2. So 64 times 2 is gonna be 128. But you move that to the other side, so it's going to be negative 128 equals b. So now we just plug this back into here. What we see is now we've got our equation where a is going to be corresponding to this 64 and b is going to be corresponding to the negative 128. So now you subtract a minus b. And when you plug that into Desmos or your own graphing calculator, you're going to see that equals 192. And that's your answer. And that is it for linear functions. There's going to be resources in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll be continuing this multi-part series next week, still in the algebra section. Thank you.